The plan worked, Ryder declared, his voice brimming with triumph as he gestured to my late father's home. It might be old, but it's spacious and in a great location. From now on, my parents and I will live here, he added, his smug grin spreading wider. I stood frozen, shock creeping through me as his words sank in. How could I have ever loved someone so selfish? I thought bitterly, watching him with growing disdain. Ryder didn't stop there. This house of your father's is mine now. Get out, he snapped, as his parents' belongings were already being moved in. A bitter laugh rose within me. Ryder had no clue about the truth. Seeing his smug expression, I couldn't help but laugh. My name is Maeve Honeywell, and I had been living with my father and my husband Ryder ever since my mother passed away when I was in high school. My father had always raised me with endless love, and my affection for him had never wavered. When Ryder suggested we move in to care for my father, I was more than willing. Are you sure? My dad asked, smiling gently, though his worry was clear. He didn't want to be a burden, but when I told him I wanted to stay close and Ryder supported the idea, he finally agreed. Ryder and I moved into my childhood home and began unpacking. My father smiled, a hint of contentment in his eyes as he said, "This is all I've ever wanted." I reminded him it was more convenient for my work, and he made us coffee, his warmth a constant I'd always cherished. Later, during a break, Ryder turned to me and said, "If you want, you could quit your job to take care of your father full-time." I was taken aback. What do you mean? He explained that, with fewer expenses, I could focus on my father, though the idea made me uneasy. I didn't want to rely on Ryder financially, so I kept working, grateful for his support. A month later, Ryder suggested it again. Now that living with my father had lightened my chores, I began to reconsider. When I expressed concern about finances, Ryder reassured me, "Don't worry about that, I'll take care of everything." Eventually, I left my job to focus on my father. At first, Dad objected, wanting me to continue working, but he understood when I explained why it was important for me to be there for him. However, things began to change. Every evening, when Ryder came home, I'd greet him warmly, but he became distant. One night, while my father and I were watching TV, Ryder snapped, "Can you keep it down? I'm eating." I was stunned. His attitude had shifted, yet he still acted like everything was normal when my father was around. I wondered if quitting my job was adding to his stress, but I had no choice but to apologize. One evening, Ryder came home late, ignoring my calls. Later, I received an email telling me he was on a business trip. These trips became more frequent, and Ryder stopped sharing his plans. When my father asked, Ryder would say, "I'm working hard for our family," though his smile seemed less sincere. Then, I got an unexpected email from my mother-in-law asking for Ryder's work address. I was taken aback. Her coldness towards me was no secret. Curious, I replied, asking why she needed it. The response was immediate. She called me, furious. "You've made Ryder take care of your father while you sit at home. He's back at our house now because of you. He forgot his lunch, and I'm trying to bring it to him. What are you going to do about it?" I was stunned. Ryder had been staying with them during his business trips, and I realized the situation was far worse than I'd thought. He had encouraged me to quit my job, but now, it felt like he had his own agenda. Fighting back tears, I reluctantly gave her the work address before ending the call. Trying to regain composure, I made coffee in the living room. My father joined me, smiling warmly. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked. "I'd love some," he replied. As we sat together, he reminisced. "Your mom and I argued a lot when we were younger, but we always stayed honest. Couples who argue and then make up grow stronger together." His words struck a chord, and I knew it was time for a serious conversation with Ryder. "Thanks, Dad," I said, fighting back emotion. I emailed Ryder, telling him about my conversation with his mother and asking to talk. "I'm busy, don't make a big deal out of this," he replied dismissively, his tone cold. Frustration and anger welled up inside me, but I tried to stay calm. From then on, Ryder stopped contributing to our household financially and ignored my inquiries about living expenses. My love for him slowly faded, and thoughts of divorce started to creep in. Though I was disappointed in him, I decided to hold off on discussing divorce, not wanting to upset my father. Until then, I managed with my savings from before the marriage. I had started to get used to Ryder's absence, finding peace in the quiet days spent with my dad. But then, one day, my father collapsed. At the hospital, we learned he didn't have much time. Sitting by his bedside, I held his hand and smiled through my tears, telling him he would get better. He tried to smile back, though his eyes were filled with sadness. When I went home to grab my things, the house felt painfully empty. I broke down, overwhelmed by the weight of memories. Amidst all this, I received a cold message from Ryder. "Since we're living separately now, handle your own expenses. Maybe you can use your father's pension." Frustrated, I threw my phone across the room. My feelings for him vanished instantly, realizing it was futile to dwell on him. I took a deep breath, composed myself, and prepared to return to the hospital. Just then, a letter arrived, bringing news that could change everything. I left the documents unopened, my heart racing as I hurried to my father's side. His condition had deteriorated rapidly, and I knew his time was running out. I spent those last days at the hospital, never leaving his side. Every night, I returned home in tears, the weight of impending loss too much to bear. When he passed peacefully, I was with him, holding his hand in his final moments. The grief was suffocating, but his memory would stay with me forever. With the help of family, we arranged the funeral. It went smoothly, though Ryder and his family didn't attend. I hadn't reached out to them directly, so I wasn't surprised. Days passed, and once the estate was settled, Ryder showed up unannounced, bags in hand. "It's been a while. I heard your father passed away," he said, his tone annoyingly casual. Seeing him there, a rush of anger surged through me, but I forced myself to stay composed. "What do you want, and why the luggage?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Isn't that a bit harsh for a husband coming home?" "Oh, and this luggage? It's my parents' stuff, of course." The way he casually referred to himself as my husband made my blood boil. After abandoning me and stopping all support, how dare he act like nothing had changed? His words were nonsense, and my patience wore thin. "Were you waiting for me to be jobless, struggling with the bills, taking care of your father, happy now that you've won?" he sneered. I couldn't find the words to respond. I just stared at him, disbelief and anger building. "No? Seems I'm the one who's stuck in your little plan," he added with a mocking grin. His mention of a plan caught my attention, and I demanded an explanation. What he said next was beyond anything I could have imagined. Living with an old man was something I just couldn't accept, but if I'd asked for a divorce, I wouldn't have gotten the house, so I played the perfect husband, made you dependent on me, and made sure you'd be stuck caring for him. This house was always meant to be mine, he concluded, his smirk widening. I stared at him in disbelief, my anger escalating. "That's impossible. You left and stopped paying the bills," I snapped. Ryder rubbed the back of his neck, irritated by my reaction. "Yeah, I lost my patience, but I never thought you'd actually go through with a divorce." The smugness in his expression made me sick. What had I ever seen in him? I could barely stand to look at him now. "The plan worked," he continued, oblivious to my fury. "This house might be old, but it's spacious and well located. Starting today, my parents and I will be living here." He was so selfish, so completely self-centered. I stood there in stunned silence, watching his parents' belongings being moved in. Ryder had no idea what was about to hit him. Then, in a burst of frustration, I couldn't help but laugh. It was the only thing I could do. "Are you crazy?" Ryder snapped, his confusion evident. I looked him squarely in the eye and smirked. "That's the word that describes you perfectly." Laughing quietly to myself, I couldn't wait to finally reveal the truth. "Didn't you know?" I said, my voice steady. "This is my house. It was never meant to be yours." Ryder froze, his expression one of utter disbelief. "What? No way," he stammered, fumbling for words. "Are you serious?" I leaned in a little, watching his reaction. "And, just so you know, we're not married anymore. Didn't your mother tell you?" His face went pale, and he immediately pulled out his phone, dialing in a frantic panic. "What? Mom says something's wrong. We're still not divorced, right?" he asked, his voice rising in panic as he overheard her response. I could hear the confusion and urgency in his tone as I stood silently, watching him process the shock. After a tense pause, Ryder dropped his phone to his side, his face contorted in confusion. "Did you really file for divorce?" he asked, as if the very thought was impossible. I smiled sweetly. "Yes, the day my father went to the hospital. Your mother sent me the papers, and I filed them without hesitation. She certainly knows how to make things happen, doesn't she?" "Damn it," Ryder cursed, his face reddening. "It wasn't supposed to be real. It was just in case, not like this." "But you filled it out, didn't you?" I asked calmly, watching his irritation grow. Intentions aside, I went ahead and filed. "You should be thanking me." For a moment, the weight of his mother's pressure turned into my opportunity to get out of this marriage. A strange, ironic relief washed over me. Ryder, now visibly flustered, pressed on, desperation creeping into his voice. "Who's going to get the house, then?" I waved his concern away, keeping my composure. "Since we were married so briefly, and since my father still held the assets at the time of the divorce, there's nothing left to divide." "What about the savings?" Ryder pushed, still grasping at straws. I raised an eyebrow. "Even the savings you had before we married need to be split. You've got no claim here." He paled, trying to argue, but the words failed him. For a moment, I was tempted to rub it in. to mock his desperate attempt to hold on to something that wasn't his anymore, but I held back. "Let's end this now," I said, my voice firm. "Bringing your things into my home without permission is trespassing. If you don't leave, I'll call the police." Ryder, stunned into silence, began hurriedly packing up his things, and within minutes, he was gone. I stood at the door, feeling the weight of the moment lift, before I turned and sprinkled salt at the entrance, saying a quiet prayer by my parents' portraits. "This is for the best. I'll be stronger now. Please watch over me." The thought of my parents reunited in the afterlife was strangely comforting. Determined to move forward, I searched for a new job. Thanks to a friend's recommendation, I quickly secured a position that fit my skills. It felt good to regain control over my life. A few days later, Ryder texted, apologizing in a tone so syrupy it felt insincere. "I'm sorry for being stubborn. I wanted to start fresh. That's why I came to the house." I couldn't help but find his message absurd. I considered responding, but ultimately chose to ignore him. His poetic texts kept coming, each one more melodramatic than the last. I began sharing his messages with my coworkers, laughing at the ridiculousness of it all. "Look, the melodramatic stalker's back," I joked, but deep down, his constant messages made me uneasy, and I continued to ignore him. One day, the doorbell rang. I peered through the peephole, my heart sinking when I saw Ryder standing on the doorstep. Surprised he'd shown up in person, I didn't hesitate to call the police. "I know you're in there. I can see your car. Please, just listen. I'm in trouble. My parents sold their house thinking we'd move in here. I have nowhere else to go. Please help." His voice trembled with desperation. I felt no sympathy. Their sense of entitlement to my home was maddening. The police arrived shortly after and, despite Ryder's protests, convinced him to leave. But Ryder wasn't done. Over the next few days, my ex-in-laws began bombarding me with calls, then emails. When I didn't respond, their messages turned accusatory. "How can you just ignore us? We were family once. You've ruined our lives. You made us lose our home, and now we're stuck in a rundown apartment. You must have inherited that house from your father, and you're not struggling financially. Why not give us the house? You quit your job, and we need help." They went as far as to say, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. I was done listening to their entitled demands. At first, I ignored them, but eventually, I blocked both Ryder and his family. Changing my contact information felt extreme, but blocking them wasn't enough. It was only a matter of time before they showed up at my door. One evening, the doorbell rang again, and this time, their voices were loud and insistent. "Come out, we're struggling. How can you just ignore us like this? We need help. What kind of person are you?" I didn't hesitate. I called the police. As I waited, the noise outside grew louder, but then, suddenly, it stopped. I peered through the peephole to see a man standing at the door, confronting my former in-laws. "Go home," the man said firmly. "You're bothering people." My ex-in-laws looked stunned, their confused expressions only growing more agitated. "Who are you? Are you her new boyfriend?" they snapped, unfazed. The man gave them a cold look. "Your behavior is the problem. This is a residential area. You're causing a disturbance, and people are noticing." Through the peephole, I could see neighbors gathering, likely curious about the scene, but the sight of my ex-family flustered and caught off guard was oddly satisfying. When the police arrived, one officer recognized Ryder and his family immediately. "It's you guys again," he muttered, rolling his eyes. The officer looked at them, his voice stern. "How much trouble are you going to keep causing? Get a grip." I thanked the officer as he left, feeling a sense of relief wash over me as I watched my ex-in-laws being escorted away, their heads hung low, and the neighbors slowly dispersing. Hours later, the doorbell rang again. I hesitated, then glanced through the peephole. To my surprise, it was the same man from earlier. Looking uncertain, I slowly opened the door, wary but curious. With a warm smile, he greeted me. "It's been a while. You should have told me you were back." I studied him for a moment, a flicker of recognition sparking but not quite taking hold. Then he added, "Don't tell me you've forgotten. It's been over 10 years. Remember me? I'm Frank." Suddenly, it all clicked. My face lit up. "Frankie," I exclaimed, the memories flooding back. "My childhood friend from next door. We haven't seen each other since we switched schools." Frank chuckled, clearly pleased. "Finally remembered me, huh? Well, I moved back, so we're neighbors again. It's been so long, and I just wanted to thank you for earlier. It really meant a lot to me." "Of course," I replied, grateful for his kindness. He laughed, making me smile in return. As we talked, we caught up on old times, and I shared some of my more recent struggles. Frank listened intently, offering his support, just as he had back in the day. When I mentioned my father's passing, he offered to pay his respects, remembering him from our childhood. It was comforting to have someone who knew me, who understood the weight of my past. A few days later, I received an unexpected letter from a law firm. My heart raced as I read that I was being accused of infidelity and ordered to pay damages. My phone buzzed, and an email popped up from an unknown address, titled, "Regarding the notification, your ex-husband, Ryder, has filed a lawsuit for marital infidelity. Admitting it now will avoid escalation. We plan to notify your workplace to protect your future. We recommend resolving this soon." The email was clearly a threat, one I suspected came from my former in-laws, not a legitimate law firm. I took the document to a real lawyer, who confirmed it was a scam. The so-called attorney wasn't even registered. I decided to play along and responded, asking them to provide proof of my alleged infidelity. Their reply came quickly: "Ryder endured immense emotional distress, and we seek compensation for that." But still, no evidence. It was becoming clear this wasn't a real legal matter. I responded coolly, "It's hard to believe a professional would act on such unfounded claims, don't you think?" They shot back emotionally, "We're moved by Ryder's passion and want to help him. We expect your sincere cooperation and don't wish to escalate this further." "Quite emotional for a professional," I replied, "and impersonating a lawyer is illegal. You know, just to confirm, you hold legitimate qualifications, correct?" That was the last I heard from them. A few days later, they sent one final message: "I'm a professional, but your arguments were unbeatable. We're withdrawing the lawsuit." "There's no need to withdraw," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "I'm calm about being falsely accused, and I'm ready to defend myself in court, looking forward to meeting this passionate lawyer." After that, all communication stopped, but the peace didn't last long. One late night, my former in-laws showed up at my door, their voices pleading. "We made a mistake. Please, spare us from the lawsuit," they begged. I was jolted awake, furious at the intrusion. "Stop disturbing me," I shouted, my voice sharp with anger. My former mother-in-law and Ryder froze, clearly startled by my outburst. Grabbing my father's wooden sword from nearby, I held it firmly in front of me, warning them, "Come any closer, and I won't hesitate to defend myself." "We're so sorry," they whispered, fear creeping into their voices. "If you were really sorry, you'd have changed by now," I said sternly, as I saw the flashing lights of a police car approaching. Apparently, the neighbors had called the cops, who quickly escorted my former in-laws away. My former mother-in-law tried to claim I had attacked them with the sword, but the police dismissed her complaint after I explained it was for self-defense due to their late-night disturbance. Frank, who had been nearby, witnessed the entire scene and gave his statement. The police agreed that my ex-in-laws had been harassing me maliciously. Finally, things settled down. Following Frank's advice, I filed a report, and with his testimony, the process was smooth. He even joked, "You were terrifying that night. I don't think I've ever heard you yell like that before." Not long after, a restraining order was issued, and my former in-laws never bothered me again. To add insult to injury, someone had recorded the commotion and posted it online, making my ex-in-laws the subject of local gossip. I had no idea how they were getting by now, but I suspected they were relying on the retirement funds of my ex-husband's parents. As for Frank and me, we grew closer over the next few months. One evening, he confessed his feelings, and we began dating. Every moment with him felt like a bright, happy turn in my life, one I couldn't have anticipated. I often thought of my father, grateful for the strange and unexpected gift he'd given me, a second chance at happiness. With Frank by my side, it was the best kind of closure, and I couldn't be more thankful.